Hello, thanks for joining me. 2020 is rapidly coming to a close, and one of my favorite things to do at the end of every year is actually to look back on what I've read over the course of the year and actually also put quite a bit of thought into what I hope to get read in the year to come. Recently, I uploaded a video where I chatted about a few of the books in fiction that I have selected to read in 2021, and I thought today I would upload a video chatting about a few of my nonfiction selections. So I find that reading in this way really helps me stay on track as far as getting read what I want to read, as opposed to sort of getting lost in distractions, which I am prone to do. So I'm going to be talking today about selections I have made in essays and my go-to genre for nonfiction, which is history. And then I'm super interested right now in consciousness studies and panpsychism, so I've got some selections there. I'm looking forward to a new release, which I'll talk about, and then I'm going to have a call for recommendations from you, the viewers, if you have any recommendations around some topics that I'm interested in reading about but don't currently have a book selected for. So that will wrap up the chat. So let's just get started with the essays. So the first one on the list here is The Unreality of Memory and Other Essays by Elisa Gabbert. This was published in 2020, and this description says the Unreality of Memory collects provocative searching essays on disaster culture, climate anxiety, and our mounting collective sense of doom. It says, these deeply researched prophetic meditations question how the world will end, if indeed it will, and why we can't stop fantasizing about it. So this collection of essays around this topic really interests me because I feel like that especially social media and the news in general really focuses on really just doom, as opposed to what is our hopefully very positive future that we all share as humankind. So I think that I'm going to enjoy that. Then I have The Proper Study of Mankind, an anthology of essays by Isaiah Berlin. This collection was published in 1997. I've had this on my reading list for quite some time, and I'm just determined to get to it in 2021. The Proper Study of Mankind brings together his most celebrated writing. Here the reader will find Berlin's famous essay on Tolstoy, his penetrating portraits of contemporaries from Pasternak and Akhmatova to Churchill and Roosevelt, his essays on liberty and exposition of pluralism, his defense of philosophy, and his history against assimilation to scientific method. I don't know, this really sounded really interesting to me. Isaiah Berlin was a great thinker of the 20th century, and so I'm just really looking forward to diving into some of these essays. Then I have The Will to Believe, Human Immortality and Other Essays in Popular Philosophy by William James, originally published in 1897. This, William James, I see this referenced all the time, and so I've just decided, especially The Will to Believe, I've decided to read that essay, and then this collection just really appealed to me along this topic, and William James, I'm just anxious to get some stuff read by him, because I haven't ever read anything by him. Then finally, the last of the essay collections that I've selected is The Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays by Albert Camus. This was originally published in 1942, and this is considered one of the most influential works of the 20th century, and yet I've never actually read it. I have read The Plague by Camus. It's the only work that I've read of his. I didn't chat it because I read that before I had a channel, but these are these essays are another essay collection that I've heard a lot about, but just never have gotten to. So that will be coming up in 2021. Then switching over to history, the first selection I have here is called Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe by Judith Herrin. This was published in 2020, this year in 2020, and it says it's a wonderful new history of the Mediterranean from the 5th to 8th centuries through a lens focused on Ravenna, gracefully and clearly written, which reconceptualizes what was East and what was West. So if you see my channel, I read periodically, usually at least one a year, I read some sort of history of the Mediterranean. So this year, this is my selection. Ravenna, it says in 402 AD, basically the synopsis is 402 AD, the Roman Empire moves the capital to Ravenna, and then it's the capital then through the Gothic King Theodoric, through the Gothic era when the Western Roman Empire ended, and then it was the capital of Byzantium, not Byzantium, but Byzantine Europe. So it was for several hundred years, it was the center of European politics. So it sounds super interesting to me. Then I have Printed in Utopia, The Renaissance Radicalism by Ed Simon. This was published this year, also in 2020. This says, Printed in Utopia examines the bloody era of the Renaissance in all of its contradictions and moments of utopian possibility. So, the Renaissance to me, it has this reputation of this great flowering of humanity, of European civilization, coming out of the Middle Ages into this sort of what could have been a utopia, or what was a utopia sometimes. I think we give it far more credit for being a sort of golden age than maybe it deserves, but I'm really interested to read a little bit more about this era, especially with through this sort of lens, the radicalism of the Renaissance. So then I have History in English Words by Owen Barfield, published in 1926. I've been wanting to get to this for quite some time. It says here, the quote from Owen Barfield is, "In our language alone, not to speak of its many companions, the past history of humanity is spread out in an imperishable map, just as the history of the mineral earth lies embedded in the layers of its outer crust. Language has preserved for us the inner living history of our soul. It reveals the evolution of consciousness." I think this is so fascinating how words and language, the meanings of words, they evolve over time, and they really reflect how the users were thinking of them at the time, how they thought, and so what their consciousness was like. I just think this is so fascinating, and I've been wanting to get to this for a while, so I am super excited to get this read in 2021. Then I have From Religion to Philosophy, A Study of the Origins of Western Speculation by Francis Macdonald Cornford, originally published in 1912. So this is, to me, super interesting too, because this is all about how philosophy got started, and it says, in this exploration of the very first utterance of philosophers, F.M. Cornford showed that the remarkable burst of abstract speculation among pre-Socratic thinkers of the 6th century BC emerged directly from the religious thought of the preceding era in Greece. So I think this is so interesting. From 1912, apparently still in print and still getting read. So I am looking forward to that. And then I have... Actually, I've already bought this book, but I haven't read it yet. Kindred, Neanderthal Life, Love, Death, and Art by Rebecca Wragg Sykes. This was published in 2020 this year, and this is all about the Neanderthals, sort of the latest research on the Neanderthals. I think it's just sort of fascinating how the Neanderthals, we used to have this idea of them as just barely sort of human, but now with more research, as more research comes to light, we find out that their culture and their culture was far more complex than was originally thought. And the amazing thing to me is that we've only known about their existence for about 160 years. I think that's just fascinating. It's got a map here of the range. They ranged all the way from Europe into Asia. So this will be coming up. I'm so excited to get that read. Then I have kind of along the lines of more Neolithic stuff, Time Stands Still's New Light on Megalithic Science. This was originally published in 1979. It's by Keith Critchlow. I wondered about this because I've read different reviews on it, but apparently it's still fairly highly thought of. This is about, I've always been really curious about sort of Neolithic societies, like Stonehenge and whatnot. We think about them, why, a lot of times the question is, why did they build this? these things that we have, that we can see today. And, another question is, how did they do it? Given that, the technology that they had, it was basically Stone Age, right? They didn't even have metals yet. So to me, this is super interesting, and I'm going to give this a read next year. Then switching to panpsychism and consciousness sort of books. So I'm really interested in panpsychism right now. Panpsychism is this idea that everything has a certain consciousness to it, including like minerals and stones and everything. All matter, because that's what holds everything together, sort of holding the atoms of everything together is being held together by something, right? These forces of energy. And there's an argument that there's a certain consciousness to it. It says, in panpsychism in the West, the first comprehensive study of the subject, David Skrbina argues for the importance of panpsychism, the theory that mind exists in some form in all living and non-living things, in consideration of nature of consciousness and mind. I think this is so fascinating. Originally published in 2005 by David Skrbina, so I am looking forward to learning more about panpsychism. Kind of along those same lines here, Galileos Error, Foundations for a New Science of Consciousness, published in 2019. This is by Phillip Goff. It says, decades have been spent trying to explain consciousness from within our current scientific paradigm, but little progress has been made. Goff makes the case for panpsychism, a theory which posits that consciousness is not confined to biological entities, but is a fundamental feature of all physical matter. From subatomic particles to the human brain. I think this is just fascinating, so I'm so looking forward to that. Then I have The Caretakers of the Cosmos, Living Responsibly in an Unfinished World by Gary Lachman. This was published in 2013. I've read a couple of other works by Gary Lachman, Lost Knowledge of the Imagination and Secret Teachers of the Western World. I really liked both of those, so I'll link to those chats down below. I did chat those on my channel. So I wanted to read another book by Lachman next year, so I chose this one. It says, Lachman brings together many strands of esoteric, spiritual, and philosophical thought to form a counter-argument to the nihilism that permeates the 21st century. Yes, Lord knows we need that, right? I'm going to give this one a go. Then consciousness, so The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, published originally in 1955. This is considered a classic. I see this referenced all the time. And so I thought, okay, 2021 has got to be the year that I get this read. He was one of the most distinguished thinkers and scientists of the 20th century. He fits into no familiar category, it says here, for he was at once a biologist and a paleontologist of world renown, and also a Jesuit priest. When this book was published in France, it was the best-selling nonfiction book of the year back in 1955, I guess. So this really works to reconcile the spiritual and the scientific in the mind of, or not the mind of man, but in man in general. And I just think this is going to be so cool. And I must get this read next year because I see this referenced literally all the time. Then another sort of classic in the field, Cosmic Consciousness, A Study of the Evolution of the Human Mind by Richard Maurice Buck. I believe this was published in 1900. I believe this is the book that actually coined the term cosmic consciousness. So Buck has this notion that there are like three levels of consciousness. Like there's like the basic one, which is like the animals and things like that, and then there's the self-consciousness of like the mass of humanity, the mass of humanity, and then there's a cosmic consciousness, which is the consciousness of everything. So sort of along those lines of maybe like panpsychism, but anyway, this is considered a classic kind of in the field, so I want to get that read. Then I have this book that's really a book about a book. This is Shakespeare in a Divided America. What His Plays Tell Us About Our Past and Future by James Shapiro. This book was published in 2020, and it appeared up on the New York Times, I think, Best Books of the Year for this year. And it says, from leading scholar James Shapiro, a timely exploration of what Shakespeare's plays reveal about our divided land, from revolutionary times to the present day. It's all about how Shakespeare has interacted specifically around politics and culture in the United States. So it just sounded really good to me, and the reviews of it are fantastic. So it's going to be a book about a book. I like reading books about books, and in this case, Shakespeare. So along those lines, there's a new release supposed to be coming out. I don't have any graphic on it or any information that I could find on it other than a tweet by the author. It's going to be about Dante's Divine Comedy. It's going to be the author is Mark Vernon. He wrote a book called A Secret History of Christianity, which I read a while back and also chatted, so I will link to that chat below. But he hosted a podcast over this year. It's been going on all year. It's done now, I believe. I'm not quite done with it, but each episode is one of the cantos of the Divine Comedy, where he sort of looks at it through a psychological and spiritual lens, and it was just so rich and good. And then he's also got a lot of talks on YouTube and stuff. You can find him if you do a search on him, Mark Vernon. And, he tweeted that he was going to have a book about the Divine Comedy, sort of that it's going to mirror his podcast, and I'm super looking forward to that. So before I run out of time, I have some books that I have some topics that I'm interested in, but I don't have book selections for. So if anybody watching the video has any selections or any recommendations around these topics, I would love to hear them down in the comments or shoot me an email. So I'm interested in cathedrals or cathedral buildings, specifically European cathedrals or cathedral building from the Middle Ages in Europe. I'm interested in, I just find that fascinating, that era, and how they were built and sort of the choices that they made, the symbolism of them. I would love to read more about that. I'm also interested in Islam as far as figures in Islamic mysticism, specifically like Sufi, and as well as Islamic art, the symbolism of the sort of the geometric designs of Islamic art. I've looked through some books on that, and they seem to be more about how to draw them and things, and I don't really want that. I really want to more of just an explanation of about them and sort of how that developed and what they mean and what they symbolize in some cases. So if anybody has any recommendations around that, I would appreciate it. I would also really be interested in recommendations of pre-Roman Jewish history or Jewish history from the Roman era of Alexandria. Those two things particularly. I read a few years ago, Joseph and His Brothers by Thomas Mann, which is a fictionalized account of the Joseph story. And that was so fascinating to me because it was this window in time into a really ancient form of, Judaism, but it was a fictionalized account. So I would really like to read and learn more about sort of pre-Roman Jewish history. And then Alexandria was just such a dynamic place during the Roman era and the Byzantine era. And so the Jewish community there had a big presence, had a big community, large community, important community, and I would like to learn more about that as well. So any recommendations there, I would appreciate. If you've seen my channel very much, you know that I love the Bronze Age. I read a lot of stuff around the Bronze Age histories, and I've chatted quite a few of those over the course of in my channel. So I'm specifically interested to read about the Hittites or the Indus Valley civilization, two sort of civilizations of the Bronze Age that I would love to learn more about. So any recommendations from on that sort of topic, I would appreciate. Not too academic, for someone like me who's a popular reader, but it can be a little academic, just not overly academic. Hittites or the Indus Valley civilization of the Bronze Age, I just think it's so fascinating. And then Indo-European people, Indo-European speaking people. I've also read quite a few books on this topic and chatted several of them on my channel. So Indo-European, all the languages, most of the languages of Europe and some of Asia, as well as India and even Western China, part of China, speak. The languages all come from a single culture. It's called the Indo-European speaking people, and so are the Proto-Indo-European speaking people. I love reading about that sort of thing, as well as just prehistorical Central Asia in general. Central Asia, I think, is just fascinating. It's this crossroads where sort of the cultures of China, the civilizations of China and the East, and the civilizations and cultures of, like, especially the Mediterranean, interact and cross this this very vast continental Central Asia. I just think it's just a fascinating region, and any sort of histories, especially from the prehistorical era from that region, I would appreciate any recommendations. So I think that's it. I will stop the chat with that. I've got a lot of stuff planned for 2021 to read. I hope to get through these. I hope to get through more than these. So we shall see how the reading year unfolds. But until next time, I guess, take care. Bye.